The wood is older than anyone alive. It grew in a forest on a small island near the equator. Men cut it down, loaded it onto ships, crossed an ocean with it, and it ended up here. Today, you might know it as Pestana Palace, one of the most luxurious hotels in the world. Madonna has stayed here, presidents sleep here, but for decades, this building was a ghost, a rotting, sleeping beauty in the middle of a modern city. This is the Palácio Vale-Flor. And before I tell you about the palace, I want to tell you about the man who built it, because this story starts somewhere very different from here. Murça, a small town deep in the mountains of northern Portugal, beautiful, remote, and in 1855, very poor. This is where José Luís Constantino Diaz was born on the 19th of March. His father, Daniel, was a miller. His mother, Violante, worked the land. They weren't destitute, but the future was clear enough. Small, local, closed. And then, when José was 16 years old, his mother died. We don't know how that felt. We only know what happened next. He left. He made his way south to Lisbon, alone, 16, nobody, and he stood at the waterfront at Terra do Prazo and looked at a steamship. The ship was bound for São Tomé and Príncipe, two tiny volcanic islands sitting almost exactly on the equator off the coast of West Africa. Most people in Murça had never even heard of them. José boarded anyway. He arrived in 1871, 16 years old, started as an assistant in a commercial house. Someone else's business, someone else's goods, someone else's future. He watched, he learned, he waited. By 1874, he'd moved onto the plantations. By 1877, he was running one. By 1882, at 27, he bought his first estate outright. The Rosa Boa Vista, the Good View Estate. The view from that point only kept getting better. Over the next 2 decades, José Constantino Diaz built something almost without precedent in Portuguese emigrant history. He didn't stop at one estate. Rosaria do Ouro, the River of Gold, Diogo Vaz, Boa Esperança, Nova Estrada, an empire of land at the precise moment when chocolate was becoming the world's obsession. And São Tomé could grow cocoa like almost nowhere else on earth. His flagship estate, Rio do Ouro, had its own railway to carry the pods, its own pier, its own hospitals, its own school for workers' children. In 1907, July, the Crown Prince of Portugal, Dom Luís Philip, visited the island personally. He stood on this man's estate and praised the Viscount for its modern organisation. A miller's son from Murça, being praised by the heir to the throne of Portugal. It is Monday, the 21st of October 1907, and he on his way is the future Marquis de Vale-Flor, on his way to Palácio de Necessidades. King Carlos I made it official. José Luís Constantino Diaz became the first Marquis of Vale-Flor. The story goes that the king, pen in hand, looked at the name on the decree and said, almost to himself, this one isn't even a silva, meaning not an old money, not aristocracy, nobody. A piece of the jigsaw was still missing. Whilst building this empire in the tropics, growing his social status, acquiring his titles, there was still something more important he needed. A place in Portugal worthy of everything he had become. But José had never forgotten that dream, not for a single day. He knew exactly what he wanted to come home to. Now married, his business is growing more and more. He's becoming more and more successful in getting recognition. In his 30s, he returns to Lisbon to find himself that plot of land to build his dream palace. He discovers this area, the Alto Santo Mara area, which actually was originally the Real Tabada de Ajuda, which are the old aristocratic hunting grounds and the agriculture fields of the original Ajuda Palace. He sees the land, he looks around, he sees the Tejo flowing by, he sees Belém Tower, the location that represents the age of discovery in front of him. And he looks around, surrounded by nature, and thinks to himself, yeah, this is the location for my dream palace. I see it. I have my vision. He didn't want a house, not even a grand house, a palace, the Versailles of Lisbon. The Venetian architect Nicola Bigali drew the first plans. Construction began properly around 1904, but the Marquis kept pushing. Too modest, too restrained, too small for what he had in mind. When Bigali died in 1908, the Portuguese architect José Ferreira da Costa took over. Miguel Ventura Tierra, one of the finest architects in Portugal, contributed details. This was not a building for one person's vision, it was a building for a statement that couldn't be made loudly enough. Walk through today and every room is a different world. The Renaissance room, lined with dark wood shipped directly from São Tomé, the floor beneath your feet literally grew on the same island that funded all of this. The music room, the ballroom, where Lisbon society came for performances and politics. Trompe-l'oeil skies on the ceiling, so real you feel the roof was opened. The Louis XV room, mirrors, gold, the illusion of infinite space. He had a residence in Paris, he knew what French luxury looked like, he wanted it here in his house, on his hill in Lisbon. That staircase, there's a story about it. The export of certain rare African woods from São Tomé was legally restricted at the time. So the Marquis, so the story goes, had boats built from the wood, sailed them to Portugal, and then had the boats dismantled and used the timber to build this staircase. A man who never let a rule stand between him and what he wanted. He also installed for the first time in any private house in Portugal an elevator. While Lisbon climbed its hills on foot, he rode. There's a chapel, small, consecrated by the Vatican, dedicated to Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception, a devout man in his way. When restorers came to this palace a century later, they found the chapel organ still intact, still in working order after decades of abandonment, as if it had simply been waiting. And the gardens, over 1,000 exotic species, many bought directly from São Tomé, a piece of the equator transplanted to the hills above the Tagus. At the centre, an artificial lake, beside it, half hidden by ancient trees, a small oriental pavilion, the Casa do Lago, the lake house. They say this is where the real conversations happened. The political deals, the affairs, the secrets of a dying monarchy whispered in a garden built on colonial gold. The palace interior was still being finished when in 1908, King Carlos I was assassinated. When in 1910 the Republic was declared and the royal family fled, while other aristocrats panicked and retrenched, the Marquis kept building. The world was ending. He was hanging gold leaf. Now, while all of this was being built in Lisbon, the empire that paid for it was still running back on the islands. And this is the part of the story that José would prefer we didn't linger on. Portugal had officially abolished slavery in 1869. What replaced it was a system called contract labour. Workers, known as serviçais, were recruited from Angola and Cape Verde, brought to São Tomé on 5-year contracts. In theory, wages, shelter, food, and passage home when the contract ended. In practice, and this was known quietly by almost everyone involved, the contracts renewed and renewed, the passage home almost never came. People arrived on those islands and they didn't leave. Think about that for a moment. A 16-year-old boy standing at the docks in Lisbon, looking at a ship, trying to imagine life somewhere he'd never been. That was José in 1871. That was also them, every single one of them. The difference is that José got to go home. In 1904, a British journalist named Henry Nevinson arrived in West Africa. He wasn't there for the landscape, he was following a rumour that kept surfacing in the British press that the cocoa from Portugal's islands in the Gulf of Guinea was not grown by free people. What he found, he published in 1906, he called it a modern slavery. He named names, he described the recruitment workers from the Angolan interior, the contracts that didn't end, the islands that people crossed to and never left. William Cadbury, whose family had been buying São Tomé cocoa since 1886, was already writing privately to plantation owners, including the Marquis, urging reform. The replies were polite. The change was slow. In March 1909, Cadbury Brothers, Fry's and Rowntree, the three great names of the British chocolate, announced a boycott, not another bean from Sao Tome until the labour system genuinely changed. The interior decoration of this palace, the paintings, the stucco, every gilded surface was completed between 1910 and 1915. After the scandal, after the boycott, after the international press had named him. Make of that what you will. But there is another storm in the story, one that no gold could stop. The Marquis and his wife Marie de Carmo lost children. Their daughter Jenny died in 1912. She was just 10 years old. The founding documents speak of his late children, plural, who else he lost, and when, the records don't tell us. A man who built a palace for a dynasty, watching his dynasty disappear. The Marquis and Maria de Carmo moved easily between Lisbon, Sao Tome and Paris. She was a close friend of Queen Amelia, Portuguese queen, in exile after 1910. In the salons of Paris, among royalty and diplomats, Maria de Carmo was in her element. In July 1932, the first Marquis died in a health spa in Bad Neuenahr, Germany, still fighting the body's failures. His body was brought home to Lisbon, buried in the Cemiterio de Prazeres, the Cemetery of Pleasures. The second Marquis survived his father by just 10 years. He died in 1942. By the late 1940s, the house had grown quieter. The man who built it was gone. The empire that sustained it was changing. And now the palace was left with one person, Maria de Carmo. With 10 million escudos, a sum that today would measure in the tens of millions, she endowed an institute in his name. Not a monument of stone, but an institution designed to endure. Imagine this room, 1951, a long table, government officials from the Ministerio de Ultramar, the Ministry of Overseas Territories, documents, a seal being pressed, and Maria de Carmo, Marchioness of Vale-Flor, watching it all become official. She had buried her husband, she had buried her son, she had lived the titles, the fortune, the era, and she had made a decision. She would not let the palace or the name simply fade away. In 1951, she established the Instituto Marquês de Vale-Flor, officially signed into law by Salazar himself. Its stated purpose, scientific research into Portugal's colonies, especially the island of Sao Tome. This is not a story of decline, this is a story of consolidation. For years, the Institute operated inside the palace, academic work, scholarship awards, the machinery of colonial intellectual life running in the Marquis's rooms. And then Portugal changed. In April 1974, the Carnation Revolution ended 50 years of dictatorship. The Estado Novo collapsed, the empire ended, decolonization happened fast, and not always cleanly. The intellectual framework the Institute had been built to support, gone, almost overnight. The Institute eventually departed, and without the people and the purpose, the palace had nothing left to hold itself together. By the 1980s, it was abandoned. The exotic trees grew wild, the Casa del Lago rotted toward the water, the frescoes in the music room darkened with damp, the gold leaf peeled away in long, slow curls. The children of Alto de Santo Mauro called it the Ghost Palace. They dared each other to climb the walls. Some said they saw lights in the upper windows at night. Some said they heard music, faint sources, drifting from the direction of the old ballroom. Some buildings carry weight. This one had plenty to carry. In 1992, Dionisio Pestana from Madeira, another island, was told about a palace on a hill in Alcântara that was dying. He went to see it, found a room, bought it anyway. Some buildings don't let you go. The architect Manuel Taina led the restoration, meticulous, honest. Restored the palace exactly, and 2 modern wings connected by glass. Conservators can clean the frescoes by hand, repair the stained glass, restore the gold leaf. They found the original architectural sketches in the basement and used them as the guide. In 1997, before the hotel had even opened, the state classified Palácio Vale-Flor as a national monument. It opened in 2001 and the world came. Presidents, kings and queens, Madonna, she lived here for the first 6 months in Lisbon. We started with this wood, I want to end here too. A boy who left Murça with nothing, crossed an ocean, worked his way from a commercial shop floor to the largest cocoa empire in the world, came back to Lisbon and built a palace that still stands, still breathes, still holds people inside it. That is a genuinely extraordinary human story. And so is the story of the people who never got to come home, whose names are on no plaque in this palace. Both stories are true at the same time in the same building. And the story isn't finished, because the Instituto Marquis de Vale-Flor still exists today. It began in 1951 as an instrument of a Estado Novo colonial policy, and then Portugal changed and the Institute changed with it. In 1988, it became an NGO and it went back to São Tomé and Príncipe, the very island the fortune came from, and started working with communities there on health and education, on food security, on human rights, quietly, without fanfare, under the same name. The name of the man who got rich on that island is now on the door of an organisation trying to give something back to it. History is strange like that. The Pestana Palace is one of the finest hotels in the world. The Instituto Marquis de Vale-Flor is still working in São Tomé today. One restored the building, the other went back to the island. So what did you think of the story? How did it make you feel? Remember to tell us in the comments below. If you want to keep discovering the real Portugal, subscribe. There are a lot more stories like this one. Obrigado.